Welcome to the Church of Thomas. These are excerpts from Awakenings in an Age of Angel by Angel Eliza. I wrote this several years back. This one is called Jerusalem. Later in the year that Jesus and Thomas had their bar mitzvah, the family went on pilgrimage to Jerusalem. Jesus and Judas were now of age and did not have to stay with their aunt at home with the younger brothers. The aunt stayed home because of her 3 little ones and a new pregnancy. That and the lack of money would have caused a great hardship for the aunt to have traveled. Her husband traveled with kinsmen, including Joseph, Jesus, and Thomas. All the relatives who were pious and could afford to go went to Jerusalem every year. Though Joseph and Mary had little by way of money, they were pious. Joseph had gone alone until his shop business had been established. When all the boys were out of diapers, Mary started traveling with Joseph. Now Jesus and Judas could go to the big city too. Judas, of course, had big plans of enjoying the sights and looking around. Jesus already had his own plans. He was bored with the debates with local rabbis and priests. He wanted new challenges. The jumble of relatives, neighbors, and total strangers mixed and blended on the road. Families found their members in the evening to cook dinner and sleep with under canopies or wagons if they were rich. When the group Jesus traveled with got to Jerusalem, all the youngsters and people who had not seen the temple before were in awe. Jesus had already seen it in a dream from his father. It had been a pile of rubble and was not impressed. All man-made temples were transient. This was a lesson that Jesus' dad conveyed. So that great temple was doomed to fall as all things of man fall. Judas became engrossed with the jugglers, fire breathers, and all the huge buildings. Jesus slipped away to the temple soon after Joseph and Mary gave both boys 3 coppers to buy treats while they explored. By the time Judas figured out that Jesus was gone, Jesus was already questioning the temple teachers. It was normal for new men to seek clarification of the law. The law was discussed constantly most of the day. Judas enjoyed his sightseeing. He knew he probably would not be able to pry Jesus loose anyway. Near evening, Judas caught up with Jesus to talk him into coming back to camp to eat and have a rest. Judas only succeeded because the teachers took advantage of the discussion. To call it a day, Jesus had fun. To everyone, Jesus appeared thoughtful and quiet at the feast. Jesus was silently discussing the law with his dad. His family did not pay attention. They knew that Jesus just got quiet sometimes. They were just happy that he was not arguing with everybody. The boys went out again the next day with a couple more coppers for their snacks. Every other night that followed, as much as the same for the family until the 7 days of unleavened bread were fulfilled. The sightseeing got old for Judas. Judas would sit under a shade tree in the courtyard. He just watched from a distance Jesus' old patterns challenging authority reassert themselves. Jesus was having fun. Judas was happy for him. The second day that Judas sat under the tree, Judas was joined by the young acolytes who wanted to become priests. It was their break time for lunch, and they had great games to pass the time. One was called Knuckles, which was sort of like a game of dice. They liked Judas. He did not argue and was personable, unlike his brother. They nodded in sympathy at his burden of such a feisty brother. These were the acolytes who would become low-level priests, the low-level priests that allowed Judas into the temple to witness Jesus' trial later. They saw Judas as harmless when it most mattered. As the long-suffering brother, he was allowed to bear witness to Jesus' beatings and trials. The last evening, Jesus would not leave. Meanwhile, the family was packing to go home to work, planning on leaving before first light. Jesus was still engaging one teacher after another in debate. They tried to tag team him. Judas brought food to Jesus to snack on. The next morning, Judas went to explain their absence only to find the family had already left. He went back to watching Jesus. Judas did not know what else to do. Finally, the whole discussion group ate communally from loaves brought by the priests. Judas lost track of time. No family members came to collect them, so he just stayed by Jesus' side. Joseph and Mary were busy traveling that first full day. They did not realize that Judas and Jesus were missing. They had thought the boys were hanging out with new friends and would look for the family at evening mealtime. They started to get a little concerned, but not much, when they did not show up then. There was a lot of cousins and tables where they could eat and socialize. On the second evening, they were ready to give a beating or two for not having the courtesy to at least check in, new men or not. The next morning, the questioning began of first relatives, then neighbors, then everyone in the group. No one had seen them for many days. Some people even volunteered that the last the boys had seen was the day before everyone's departure to head home. Mary was frantic, and Joseph had to dissuade her of the idea of leaving without telling anyone in the group. They left as soon as they were packed that morning. Concern gave their feet extra speed. They checked with the city guard, who of course wanted a bribe to tell the worried parents any information. All they would say was that there were no dead bodies of young men having been found. Well, at least no bodies fitting those descriptions. This snide comment did not do anything to calm Mary. After checking the fairgrounds, open town areas, Joseph finally suggested the temple. It may not have been the first choice of Judas, but it would have been just the attraction that would draw Jesus. When they arrived, Mary spotted Jesus sitting in a big group of mixed ages, arguing with the group. Mary could not help scolding Jesus in front of the group. She said, "You two have had us worried sick. Don't you have any respect for your parents?" Joseph was irritated but glad to have had this over with, and so he thought. Jesus was in teaching mode. Jesus said, "I am where I belong. Don't you know that I would be in my Father's house?" Mary insisted that Jesus and Judas leave the temple immediately. Judas was apologizing as they collected their robes. Jesus regretted leaving, but he knew he would teach in the temple again. After the family got home, the whole incident blew over and real life reasserted itself. Chairs to fix, skinned knees, chores, gardens to tend. Jesus never forgot that trip to Jerusalem. He continued his studies politely with Joseph, and more importantly with his dad.